On today's podcast, we sit down with veteran PR executive Rick Scott. Rick talked a lot about the great aspects of PR in relation to what do you need? What kinds of elements do you need time-wise? How do you set up a campaign? How do you identify the audience that you're going after in terms of, PR, in terms of what you want to do? What's the elements that he needs before he can actually start a campaign? We also talk about various genres and how they differ with regards to marketing and PR. A lot of great stuff there for you guys that are looking to understand the whole role of PR in your own career. You don't want to miss it. Insiders, are you ready? Welcome to MUBUTV's Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage artists and music business professionals who are dedicated to having a successful career in the new music industry. Here are your hosts, Rich Ezra and Eric Knight. Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage your music career. On today's episode, we sat down and spoke with veteran PR executive Rick Scott. We discussed exactly what is publicity, as well as its purpose. When do you need a PR campaign? And what needs to be present before you embark on that process? How to identify the audience PR-wise you're trying to reach? How much time should you commit to a campaign? What to look for in someone you're going to hire for PR? And much, much more. You won't want to miss it. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Hey Insiders, are you looking to take your music career to the next level? Then you need to know about the Music Business Registry. The Music Business Registry is the leading music industry publisher of the most up-to-date contact information for major and independent record label A&R, music publishers, artist managers, music attorneys, music supervisors, and much, much more. The Music Business Registry is the trusted industry standard and source serving the music business community for over 28 years with the most accurate and up-to-date contact information available. Their titles include the A&R Registry, the Film and Television Music Monthly, the Music Publisher Registry, and the Music Attorney Registry. All of their publications are available in print, PDF, CSV, or online subscription. Visit them now at musicregistry.com and receive a 10% discount by using coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout. That's musicregistry.com, coupon code MUBUTV10. When you're ready to put your music to work, musicregistry.com.
Welcome back, Insiders. Today's featured interview is with publicist Rick Scott. What is a publicist? What do they do? What's their purpose? What's the purpose of publicity? Well, the answer to that last question is to spread the story. That's the purpose of publicity. And we sat down with Rick Scott, who has his own PR company, and we talked about some very interesting things in terms of what exactly does a publicist do for an artist and how that differs from genre to genre. We also discussed, the lead time, like what does it take time-wise to set up a campaign? How long is the average campaign? When you look at all of those things that just appear when an artist's album comes out, a lot of that stuff has been set up for months and months and months, getting the interviews, getting the cover stories, getting the photos, getting all of that done so that when it comes out, everything just launches at once. And also we looked at some of the interesting things in PR, like how he identifies an artist's audience for PR purposes, which is something that I think a lot of you, want to understand. We've talked about this a lot on this show, Eric, where we talk about how does an artist identify who their audience is. And He spoke about that from the PR perspective of, knowing who to reach.
Yeah, and one of the other interesting points I thought was, what should artists be looking for when actually hiring a publicist, which I thought is very, very important.
Very crucial.
And also, at what point does an artist need a publicist, which I think you alluded to earlier, and, what needs to be present from the PR's point of perspective of before you start working with an actual client. What needs to be there in place? Is there got to be already a story, or do you just work with somebody that's just completely unknown? So I thought it was a very, very interesting look into the world of PR.
Absolutely. And what is it that you're PRing? What is it that you're asking a publicist to do? Are you asking them to publicize a record? Are you asking them to publicize a tour? Are you asking them to publicize a show? Meaning like an event where, it's build the event and then it's over? I mean, so different ones take a different path. So it's interesting in that regard.
Absolutely. So Insiders, sit back, relax, and enjoy our featured episode with Rick Scott.
Rick, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on today.
You know, I always like to start at the beginning with our guests and ask this one question, which is, at what point, or do you remember the point in your life when you knew that music or the music business was going to be your professional career path?
I don't remember. I've always loved music, and I was a drummer. I remember 12 years old teaching myself to play the drums to Earth, Wind & Fire records. And I always knew that music entertainment was my passion, and I just didn't know what phase. In fact, I thought I would be maybe on stage playing those drums. And kind of the pivotal moment that I talk about, Rich, is when I was 16. I remember playing one night, and literally it just kind of occurred to me in the middle of a drum solo, if you will. I was like, if I'm going to have a career long term, I'm going to need to do it behind the scenes.
Okay.
And I didn't know what aspect. I thought maybe management or whatever, but I wasn't sure. But I just knew that it was kind of the pivotal moment where I shift from a mindset of I am going to be a performer one day to I will be somehow a creative executive.
Did you continue as a musician during that time, or?
Yeah. I didn't just drop my sticks and that was that. But I played through college, so probably another 5-6 years or whatever, and then stopped playing, and I was already DJing in nightclubs and kind of started that way.
Interesting. This is Eric. Thank you so much for joining us on this. I thought we start off with defining exactly what is publicity for our audience.
Well, the old definition was anything that is not paid, meaning like advertising, and if you don't pay for it, it's public relations. But of course you pay for public relations, right? So yeah, how I kind of explain things. If you see a story in a newspaper or a magazine, if you see somebody on a television show like Jimmy Fallon or Jimmy Kimmel, or if you read an article or a review on a website, or hear a podcast such as this one, then it's usually the result of a public relations effort.
Talk to us about how public relations has morphed in the last 10, 12 years.
Excellent question. One of the things that I pride myself in is I consider myself a storyteller. And I think that that's a big reason or how public relations has changed, because you've got to tell a compelling story. Any journalist out there is receiving 200 to 300 press releases per day and a few hundred albums every week to listen to. So how are you going to cut through that clutter? And I say the way you do that is tell a compelling story. And especially I work with instrumentalists a lot of times, so they're wordless, right? I mean,
they're speaking through their music. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you put a voice on an instrumentalist? And so I try to tell, and this is a shout out in a way to the old VH1 Behind the Music, but I try to find the story behind the music for every artist and try to tell that story in a compelling way that will make a journalist want to interview the artist or write about the record or have somebody perform on a show. And so that's a big change in PR. It's we get to tell our story that way, and then through social media. Those are the two main areas where PR has changed because the power of social media. So we get to tell the story ourselves in our own words. An artist can post things on their website, they can post things on their social media, and speak kind of directly to their consumers, the people who buy their albums and concert tickets.
Well, then, based on that, at what point does an artist or a band need to be at before they get a publicist?
I don't necessarily use measuring sticks as far as like where they need to be at. I think anybody that's making a record and wants to sell it needs public relations, and whether it's social media or straight ahead PR, meaning writing a press release, sending it to a journalist, sending an album out for review, trying to get a media outlet to cover their concert, review their performance, etc. You need that all along. You need that from the beginning because, as I said, the marketplace is packed, overwhelmed with bands and people who are making records and performing on the concert scene. So you need public relations to differentiate yourself. How are you unique? Why should anybody care? That's one of the first questions that a journalist will usually ask is, again, because they're getting a few hundred of these a day. So it's like, why should they pay attention? Why should I care?
Exactly. No, I couldn't agree more. Rick, can you speak to what needs to be present before you can start working with a client?
One of the things that, anytime somebody reaches out to me, and usually, number one, they're making a record, or they have a record and they want to sell it. So that's kind of, I guess, maybe a starting point. And before I have that conversation with them, or meeting or consultation, whatever you want to call it, I'll look. Do you have a website? What are your social media numbers? I don't ask them. I look. It's very easy to just go on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and see does a group or the artist have any kind of a presence? Do they even have a website? Interestingly enough, there's somebody that I'm close to signing right now. They were referred by a trusted industry veteran who I've worked with for over 25 years, and I subsequently find out that this is going to be their third album, and they've got a lot of A-list session players and well-known contemporary jazz artists on the record. No website, no social media, and I just can't believe that somebody that how is this even possible? but
yeah.
I tell them, and it's really great music too, which is I'm just like, wow, like. It's high quality. Like, I'm going to be proud if we do work together. I'm proud to represent them. But it's like they're at square one when it comes to actually marketing their music.
Right. But I think also, too, it's a product. I mean, I know you specialize kind of in the smooth jazz space. That's definitely an older audience. And I would think that a lot of the musicians that are transitioning into this new world are still having trouble finding that, just even trying to get used to what social media is and how to work it. I'm sure you're running into that possibly a lot.
Well, I'm going to take it back to the beginning of that. And a smooth jazz specialist. First of all, heck no. I've been in all genres. I was telling a story to somebody literally yesterday. When I first started out on my own company, I was branded the teen publicist. And because I had a bunch of teen stars that I worked with. And so, for the last 25 years, I've worked with a lot of contemporary jazz stars, but I've also worked with Spoon. I've also worked with Erasure. I've also worked with a lot of world music artists. I mean, and the whole other side of my business, which you guys may know from some of the materials that I sent you ahead of our conversation, is I've been in sports for since 2003. And for the last few years, being that I'm a vegan athlete, I work a lot with some nonprofits on animal rights protection and veganism and plant-based living. So you can brand me however you want to brand me. So as far as technology, when we were saying like with an older demographic, I think everybody's on Facebook. I mean, my parents are on Facebook. You'll find a lot of folks are on Instagram. Twitter is interesting as well. Personally, I'm using it less. I mean, I guess I kind of put tweets out there on a daily basis, but really, I mean, my own posts, I'm kind of writing for Instagram, and then I share them on everything, including LinkedIn.
I guess what I meant was how they, you're right. Everybody is on Facebook, or grandmothers, grandparents, everybody. But as far as in terms of how to use it and how to use it effectively and properly, I would assume that that's a big learning curve with some artists. So.
Yeah, well, I think one of the conversations, again, when I start out with any artist, I explain to them, because I've found that a number of them think that when they hire me, they're covered. And
Right.
I explained that to successfully market a record in today's music industry, there are 5 elements, and ideally all 5 elements are happening at the same time, and they are feeding off of each other. They are the fingers on one hand, so no one is greater than any other. Public relations is one. Radio promotion. Concerts. Are you performing? Are you touring? Do you have an agent? Are you out there working performing regularly as much as you can? Retail marketing and advertising, and then social media marketing. All 5 of them hopefully are happening at the same time and feeding opportunities off of one another.
Absolutely. Really quickly, Rick, as a follow-up to the previous question, could you take us through a typical workday to give us an idea of what a PR and marketing executive does?
I try to make any day not a typical day.
Right.
I always say, like, I never know what exactly my day is going to be like, but that's really not true, of course. On any given day, I am maybe writing a press release, sending it out to national, regional, and local print, broadcast, and online media outlets. Maybe I've got an artist on tour, so I'm sending out pitches to local media to interview the artist, cover the concert, put them on a morning show. Maybe creating a media target list for an album release, because every artist is different. So I don't just push a button and say, you guys reference my specialty in contemporary jazz, and I don't push a button and say, okay, this is the same list. I know, Eric, you and I share a connection with Norman Brown. A Norman Brown media list is different than a Richard Elliott media list.
Absolutely.
It's where somebody's from. Is somebody African American? Is somebody jazz? Is somebody world music? Is somebody a guitar player? It's a different media list. So
yeah.
So, on any given day, I'm working on kind of those areas. Maybe I'm writing a pitch, creating a pitch for press coverage or for an event.
It's interesting listening to you talk about this, Rick, and I'm curious, as you're speaking about all of these different elements that you're involved with, Can you talk to us about when you're hired by a client to execute a PR campaign, or you're hired to work with them? How much lead time do you require to set up a campaign for, let's say they hire you and the album is coming out? What realistically is the time campaign for an album and for a tour?
Excellent question. For an album, 2 to 3 months. We usually start 2 to 3 months prior to a record release. In order to set up a campaign. Most national magazines, even Billboard, wants music 60 or 90 days before it's released. And even though lead times have shortened in some areas because of technology and everything, but usually, like right now, I'm working on a campaign, and I just got an email the other day, and Downbeat, for instance, is working on their March issue, and it's December right now, and with the time that we're doing this interview, I don't know when this is going to air, but they're working 3-4 months ahead. And so the first thing you do when you're going to start a campaign is you got to write and distribute a press release, letting people know a record exists. Here's who wrote it, played on it, produced it, the single, any tour dates, any other news that you want to put out there about the artist. And that's you got to get that out there first, 2 to 3 months before the record's released. Then we create that media target list that I was just referencing, and or do a mailing or depending upon the genre. Jazz, they want physical CDs. Other genres, if it's when I work with a pop music project or an alternative rock or an R&B project, you can distribute an album digitally. But still, 2 to 3 months before is ideal. As far as a concert tour and a tour date, I usually will start pitching a tour or a concert date 4 weeks before a show. So yeah, that's kind of 3 to 4 weeks is how I'll advance a concert date.
I wanted to ask you, and this is something we touched on earlier a little bit. Can you discuss how you identify an artist's audience for PR purposes?
I am blessed that a lot of times artists come to me and they're known entities. But I also work with brand new artists as well. And maybe it's their first record. And so, yeah, you got to, I ask them. One of the most important things that you can do for a client is listen. ask them the question. They're going to tell you exactly what they want, and then you give it to them. I mean, the thing that drives me nuts is if somebody comes to me, they're like, "Hey, can you send me a proposal and give me your ideas or whatever?" And first of all, I don't give away my ideas for free. So, I'm happy to create a generic proposal. Like, here's basically the nuts and bolts of what we're going to do. But no, I would rather listen to them and hear what their goals are, and then I try to figure out how I can help them accomplish those goals. So with an artist, it's not for me to say, oh, well, this would appeal to the Americana audience, or this would appeal to jazz, or this would appeal to alternative rock. It's not for me to define that. It's for me to listen to the music and talk to the artist and hear what's important to them. I'll often ask an artist to say, I mean, I'm very comprehensive and thorough in what I do, and I feel I'm going to get somebody well covered. But I always ask them, I said, if you are welcome to give me a list of a dozen outlets or so that are important to you, like what publications you want to be in or what shows do you want to be on, and then I will make sure that I'm pitching them. Because sometimes they're going to hit me off guard, and then I'm like, oh, wow, that's something I wouldn't have thought of.
Right. And so you typically have like an exploratory meeting or conference with them and go over the ideas, listen to what they have to say, and then from there you build the plan around that.
Yes, and actually even before I'll make time, because time is precious, I listen to the music. For me, it begins, like when we're talking a music client, it begins and ends with the music. Because what am I going to want to work nights and weekends? What am I going to want to stay up and past midnight writing a press release or out at a show on a night and a weekend? And so I got to be passionate about it. And so I listen to the music and start there. And if I'm feeling it, I mean, I'm blessed right now. Somebody reached out to me the other day. They're pretty persistent. They're from my hometown, Philadelphia, so it's like I kind of want to look out for them. But, like, I'm not feeling it musically at all, and it's not of a certain level. It's not a certain level of professionalism that I would expect and want to put my name on. And so I'm going to have to decline the project because it's just not quite up to standards. So
there is that point of that too, that you're getting stuff from artists that might not be up to, broadcast standards or standards that you would want to get behind of. So you will pass on those type of projects.
Absolutely. It's my name.
Yeah,
Great
exactly.
Scott Productions, and it's my name. I'm Rick Scott. So yeah, it's like, I always say to people, I've stayed small since day one. My company is me. I used to have an assistant when we used to do all the mailings ourselves, but now that the mailings are done digitally, or the client usually does the mailings, it's me. And so I don't hand off the project to a junior account executive. There are larger firms than me, of course, and oftentimes you'll have a VP or senior VP or a president of the PR firm, much like the level where I'm at, take a meeting, and they bring with them a junior associate who is cutting their teeth and learning the ropes or whatever, and that ends up being that person's day-to-day.
Exactly.
That artist day-to-day person. And it's like I always say, like, when you hire Great Scott Productions, you're hiring me, period. So, yeah, I've got to be feeling it. I got to be passionate about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You touched on some things prior in some of your answers that I just wanted to explore for a minute, and that is, can you talk to us, Rick, about some of the ways that PR differs for various genres of music?
Well, there are different outlets. I mean, that's the obvious. Like, there are jazz magazines. There are magazines geared towards the African American community. I mean that's the obvious answer. But when you're pitching, say, Billboard or whatever, you got to know what the writer's beat is, or what their area of interest is, or what they're passionate about. If you're reaching out to the LA Times, there's a staff of music reviewers, but the job of the publicist, and this is why you hire a professional, because you and I'll tell you a story about that. When I first moved out to LA almost 30 years ago and started working in PR, and I was working for somebody else, and I remember pitching this great writer at the LA Times named Leonard Feather, who is a legend.
Yes.
And I wasn't working a jazz project, but I'm pitching Leonard Feather, who was a nationally award-winning jazz journalist, and I'm pitching him this country project. I didn't know. So you need to know. So that's where it gets different, is to know like who's into what. If you're talking, if you're talking a book or at a TV show, like you kind of want to know like, okay, who is into what, and pitch accordingly. I think one of the things that where PR is continuing to change also is it used to be very much like kind of a blanket thing. You send out an email blast to thousands of people, and in a way I kind of do that when I put out a press release. But when you're pitching, you need to define it. You need to narrow it down.
Yeah.
Super targeted.
Down. So what I always say to people, or when I explain to people when I'm doing a PR campaign, my press release is going to go out to a couple thousand national, regional, local, print, broadcast, and online media contacts. And then I'm going to narrow that down to, depending upon, because I have a few different levels of campaigns, it might be 100 contacts, it might be 200 contacts. So basically like 10% or whatever, or 5%, like I'm narrowing it down. Who are the people that are most likely to be interested in this particular project or this particular artist, this particular album, or this subject, if it's not music? And that's who we're then going to send the product to and start pitching for coverage.
What about the idea of various genres in relation to, I mean, I would think that there's a difference between the PR effort on your part between getting someone to write a review and getting a reviewer down to review a concert, to review the show.
Somebody recently a client was telling me, they said, we're not so interested in concert reviews.
Okay.
And I get it. I mean, to me, like, a concert review happens after the fact, right? I mean, so you're not selling anything anymore. You want to have coverage before a concert because you're trying to sell tickets. You want to get butts in seats, right? So there's value to that. A lot of artists don't necessarily care what one particular person thought or experienced when they were at that concert, meaning they don't care about a concert review. They want a record review has a certain value or whatever, because somebody's going to read that.
Or maybe they're worried that the review is going to be bad of the show and that's going to spread around, and maybe they don't want that either.
Yeah, there's always that. If there's somebody that's confident in their performance, then so be it. And then there's another side of it as well. I had 9 years where I was blessed to work with Earth, Wind & Fire, who I referenced in our call earlier. And I remember, and everywhere they went, their reviews 99% of the time were stellar. And people were on their feet and left happy and joyous, and it was just an amazing experience. And I remember one time back at the old Universal Amphitheater, LA Times reviewed the show, and it wasn't a good review. It was 1 out of 100 reviews that we got on the tour, and it wasn't a good review. But everybody left the show. It was sensational. And the Verdine White, the charismatic bass player of the band, was upset. He takes things quite personally, and called me up. He says, "I want to write a rebuttal." And he wrote an editorial response that I submitted to him and helped tweak or whatever that we sent to the LA Times, and they ran it.
Wow.
So yeah. So it's like, who cares what one person's perspective is on what their experience is in the show, and you don't know what their agenda is when they walk into it or whatever. So lots of times an artist might not care about a review, but the other side of it is, if you're an amazing performer, hey, you get a great review from a respected media outlet. That's gold, I think. And
that could carry over for other tour dates on the tour.
Absolutely, and help you land more tour dates.
Rick, let me ask you, is online publicity more important than offline for a new artist?
Any publicity is good publicity in that sense. So I wouldn't say that one has value over another. I think again, you guys, going back to an earlier question, what has changed about PR? I remember years, say 10 years ago, everybody just wanted print. It was just all about print. Now, everything is online, and I I explain to a client ahead of time that most of the press coverage that we're going to get is going to be online media coverage. Now people don't necessarily look at that sideways anymore, or think that it's any less value. It's there are smaller. There's obviously been a lot of contrition in the print media industry, meaning there's a lot less daily newspapers, and then there's a lot less space. If you look at Entertainment Weekly, they're reviewing 5 records a week, and I already explained to you that any journalist is getting a few hundred albums per week to listen to. How do you get one of those 5 spots?
Yeah.
If you take Billboard magazine and you talk about a genre specific, Billboard used to have a jazz page. A page just devoted to jazz news, literally a print in the print publication, a jazz column with news items, and then always a feature. And now, they're going to review a Miles Davis box set or whatever,
right?
But they're not going to review a new Norman Brown record, Come on, man.
Exactly.
Yeah, like a box set that's cost $1,000 that only 1,000 of them were printed, but they'll do the review on that. Yeah, no, I totally get it. And then it's also, you can look at, I know the Billboard people, and they told me 38% of the columns that used to exist there are gone.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's like, that's a huge amount of content, whether it was audio, whether it was jazz, whether it was classical, all these people that, and you remember when you used to, read Billboard, it was much, much thicker. It had much, much more content. Of course, before the internet, Billboard reigned supreme, as most of the trades did. Well,
a little context for listeners. I know we're talking on Saturday. It's always sad when I open my door on Sunday morning and pick up the newspaper. It looks like what the daily newspaper used to look like. It's meaning in terms of thickness, and I don't even get I don't even subscribe to the weekday paper anymore. I just get the Sunday, and most people it's online. It's online now. So, and it's a lot more current.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let me ask you, Rick. In your experience, what are the most common and preventable mistakes that you see new artists make PR-wise?
Well, one of the things that I've referenced a couple of them. One, trying to do everything themselves, and you're going to send out a blanket pitch to the wrong people, to maybe the wrong outlets. I get contacted from time to time about representing a metal band. And I can tell you can look at my career and all as diverse as my career is, I have never for a minute been in the metal world. And when somebody is pitching me, who is well known as being one of the top jazz publicists in the country, and even though I'm in all areas, metal is one area. So I see people make the same mistake when they're contacting media outlets. I think also when it comes to writing, say their own press release or a bio, errors, grammatical errors, spelling, punctuation, things like that will immediately reduce your credibility. And will weaken your effort for sure. So you gotta, if you're going to do anything yourself, make sure everything's right. Just use spell check, know your grammar, and make sure your project is professionally presented.
Hey, Insiders, we hope that you've been enjoying our featured interview. Stay tuned because we've got so much more value coming your way. But before we dive back in, a word from our sponsor. Hey, Rich, you're the founder, CEO, legend of Music Business Registry. Tell us what the Music Business Registry is all about.
Well, what it's about, Eric, is it's a company that is designed to provide the most accurate and up-to-date contact information for the music business. So if someone is looking to reach the A&R community, if someone is looking to reach music publishers, if someone needs to reach artist managers, if someone needs to reach music attorneys, if someone's looking to place their music into film and television and needs to reach all the music supervisors, that's the contact information that we provide. We've been doing it for 28 years. We're sort of the industry standard, if you will, for the music business, and have been serving them since 1992. So that's what we do.
Amazing. So if I wanted to find out let's say, A&R people from Warner Brothers, let's say, I can just go in there and find that in the A&R registry?
Absolutely. You'll find all of the Warner Brothers in there. You'll find the Warner Brothers in LA, Warner Brothers in New York, Warner Brothers in Nashville, Warner Brothers in London, Warner Brothers, probably in Australia as well. So those are the main territories that we cover.
Amazing. And we're offering all of our insiders right now that are listening, if you visit musicregistry.com and use coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout, you'll get a 10% discount off your first order. That's musicregistry.com, coupon code MUBUTV10. Anything else you want to say, Rich?
Well, when you're ready to put your music to work, musicregistry.com.
Rick, is success today being redefined for music artists?
That's a great question, and I'm going to talk about it from a perspective of a jazz artist, and I'm going to do so because, believe it or not, I was shocked to learn this a few years ago, but jazz is the smallest selling music niche out there. Classical music sells more. So
wow,
jazz jazz is small, and jazz is fragmented also. There's straight ahead jazz, there's contemporary jazz, there's Latin jazz, there's fusion. There are other
smooth jazz,
ideations. So it's broken down into all these different segments. And so when you look at the Billboard chart, we were just talking before, which Billboard is still the Bible and will always be the Bible of the music industry, and it ain't a hit until it's in Billboard, right? So if you look at the Billboard chart on any given week and you say, okay, what's the number one album on the Billboard jazz charts, and you look at the sales and you see they're selling 900 units. Number one.
That's number one. Yeah, it doesn't get any, it only gets lower after that.
Correct. Yeah. And you start to realize, this is a term that when I first came into the business, a guy I worked for used to say, it's 7-Eleven money. You're making 7-Eleven money in the jazz world for the most part. So like in terms of record sales. So how are you going to make a living? Well, the successful ones are making a living by touring. So you're touring, and then you're selling your record at your shows. So you're going to define success a little bit differently when you look at the numbers. Like, Billie Eilish can come out and sell millions of downloads and millions of streams and records that way. So there's still people, Beyonce's still going to sell a million units, and Justin Bieber probably as well. But if you look at any of the artists, and I work with a lot of them, so I don't even necessarily want to mention names, but if you look at these are artists who maybe a decade or so ago went gold. They would sell 500,000 units, 500,000, and now their current album, they're lucky if they sell 50,000.
Right. But one thing that I do notice, not to interrupt, but one thing that I do notice, like with working with somebody like a Norman Brown, is that audience, obviously it's an older demo. They do still love physical product, because I've actually sold his merch at the shows, and he's one of the more popular selling artists. And, they're selling those CDs $20-25 a pop, and he would sell a shit ton of those at every show that we were at. So, I know you're saying that it's a smaller audience, but there's definitely still, I guess, something to kind of be said about that they're still buying that product, and they have more spending power as far as that audience is concerned.
Yeah, it's different. It just changes, and I will say also there's a talent that I'm really excited about, and this might be of interest to you guys. Just for what you do and your listeners, I'm working with an artist named Kayla Waters, and she is second generation. Her father, Kim Waters, is a smooth jazz saxophone player who's had a great deal of success over the years. And Kayla just turned 29. She's put out 2 albums. First single went number 1. Billboard. That was from her first album. Second album was called Co-Evolve, came out last year. First single went number 1 on Billboard again. Second single came out, did okay. Third single right now is number 2. It was 3 spins short this week. Depending upon if you air this podcast, even next week, it might be her third number 1 single out of 4. So she's a bright young artist at 29 years old, and I look at her, and the reason, like, I'm working with her beyond PR. One might say management, but we're not even calling it that, because basically we're looking at these numbers, and this goes to your question about success and defining things. I look at Kayla as having an enormous amount of potential to cross over into other areas. She's a beautiful and bright, talented and creative young African-American artist who can be, like as somebody said recently, she could be the next Alicia Keys. Now, Kayla is primarily a pianist, an urban jazz pianist. She does a little bit of vocals, but her look, her marketability, there's a brand there that could cross over. It can cross beyond smooth jazz or contemporary jazz, whatever you want to call it, into R&B. She could play on a bill with Erykah Badu or Jill Scott. She can fit in with Maxwell. She fit, her whole look, her style, her appeal, her intelligence, her creativity, her inspiration, transcends other areas. She can have a brand of skincare products. She could have a brand of clothing. So to me, it's like, that's what I got excited about with Kayla, because like, instead of saying, okay, well, we're just going to crank out records, and you're referencing Norman and having like an aging following or whatever. Like with Kayla, there's obviously people from that space from where she started, and that's her base. And
that's her base, yeah.
Exactly. But my goal and our vision is about crossing her over into broad mainstream outlets, because she fits that. She can do that. Not every artist can, but when you see somebody with that kind of potential, that's when I get excited and get creative.
Yeah, I think like a Norah Jones type of situation where you kind of see that crossover.
For sure.
It's interesting to hear you speak about this, Rick, because do you do much work with the international markets? Do you do a lot of work in Asia or other countries, or just primarily in America? You do not? Okay.
I just worked the Spyro Gyra tour that they were all throughout Europe. But basically, what I say to people is I handle the United States, and I'll get into a little bit of Canada, and there are some international outlets that I work with. But normally, I mean, it is hard enough to keep up to date with all the changes in media outlets and the content and knowing people in the United States alone. In fact, there are a lot of publicists, I'm national. There are some publicists, and even if you go to a firm or whatever, they'll, any of the bigger firms, they might have a New York and an LA office, and they kind of divide things with the Mason-Dixon line or something.
Right.
And some people will only special because there's so much to keep track of. So I'm smart enough to know, I don't know every magazine in France, but I can be the captain. I can be the quarterback for a campaign. So like when Spyro Gyra just went on tour and toured throughout Europe, interviews can still be scheduled all through me. I can make sure that the press materials are ours, and the talking points are the ones that I come up with or whatever. And but usually there will be somebody that's going to handle a publicist in different territories.
Right. The reason I ask you that question is because, in Asia, and this goes to the heart of what you were saying about Kayla, right to the heart, is that one of the things that I notice about a lot of artists, and I've gotten this confirmed from students who are from China, who are from Southeast Asia, who are from Indonesia, is that a lot of the stars in those countries fit the criteria of exactly what you were saying about what your vision is for Kayla, which is that not only are they on TV, but they're also music stars. Or not only are they music stars, but they also have a fashion line, or they're endorsing, this beverage, or they're on TV as well, or they have a fashion line and they have a recording career. So there's a much broader base to entertainment, and I think that that's something that, we see among big stars here today in music today, where people are doing different things, some to varying degrees of success than others. I know, Sean Combs, for example, has had tremendous success in his clothing line and in his liquor line, and being an entrepreneur for television with Revolt. But the point that you're making, I think, is a very, very interesting one, because it goes to the heart of a cultural shift in how we perceive artists, where you were speaking about the potential of all of those other areas that Kayla could be a part of. And that is something that, you know, everybody had sort of their own lane. And you remember when you started in this business, you didn't do certain things. If you did, you were perceived as a sellout. You didn't license your stuff to commercials. You didn't do fashion. You didn't do TV. And if you did, you were considered like somebody who was either second rate or lightweight. I mean, those perceptions were very, very real. And I think that, you know, it's kind of an evolution. And that's why I was asking you about if you dealt with the international market, not so much from a workplace, but when you look at what kinds of things were going on, they are very, very much in alignment with the vision that you have for Kayla.
You're right about a lot of those things, and one of the things that comes to my mind is outside of music, and I mean, number one, exactly what you're talking about is branding and brand extension. So right, that would be I mean, that's a clear way to put it, which is exactly why my title for Kayla, as I said, we looked at it and we said the music industry today, as it is now, no longer really works for anybody that is an instrumentalist in the jazz world specifically. And so let's just throw the old paradigm out the window and let's create our own thing, period. What do we got to lose, right? So literally the term or the title that I have is artist direction and branding. I could say, like, as I said, in old school money, we could say I'm Kayla's manager. And publicist or whatever, but like that's old school money. The new school is where we're at today, and we're thinking forward. And so it's like artist direction and branding. Yeah, so,
you're thinking of the full immersive 360 experience and building all the verticals around that.
Exactly. And so what you were talking about is exactly. I mean, that's a big change, as you said, over the last 10 or 20 years, where it's branding and people are in artists are in all kinds of different things. I mean, I was saying about plant-based. One of the things I love about Beyonce is that she has a vegan food delivery line. I mean, like, who would have thought? Like, when she started out, she was thinking about making records and selling concert tickets, right? And you know, I doubt that was like, one day I want to have a vegan home food delivery service, meal service. Like, you know, I'm sure that was not on her list. But that's what, like, today it's like you can really kind of do anything. And you were saying very accurately so that years ago those things would be frowned upon. I wonder now, like when I watch a commercial and I see a company license Prince's "Let's Go Crazy" or whatever, and I'm thinking like, wow, he's probably turning over in his grave.
He is. He definitely is.
Yeah, but you know, and you know, that changed, and I also think about one of the things how we see commercials today where you see in the U.S. George Clooney doing a TV commercial in the U.S.
Nespresso ads.
Yeah. Now, what those guys used to do, unbeknownst to us in America, those guys have been doing commercials for years.
Yeah, Japan and
20 years ago, Brad Pitt and those guys, they were doing commercials in Europe, and the idea was they was only staying in Europe, and therefore they're not going to be branded a sellout or just in it for the money or whatever else. But now, all of a sudden, it's becoming more acceptable now, where you can see Charlize Theron, you know, doing some kind of a perfume.
Christian Dior ads.
She's the spokesperson for Christian Dior, and all of those ads.
But she was a model before in her previous life, so, I mean, it kind of made sense for her to do that.
And now she's an Academy Award-winning actress. It's But the perception is what's different.
Exactly.
The perception about doing that. It's no longer perceived as like, oh, God, you really must be desperate, or you're selling out. Yeah. It's the same thing in music with licensing your songs for uses in other visual mediums or TV or films or video games or advertisement. I mean, that used to be something that you just didn't do. I mean, back in the day of the 70s, you didn't even appear on television. That was something that artists just didn't do. I mean, outside of maybe Don Kirshner's rock concert, that was really the only place you could see, you know, Pink Floyd or ELO or any of these artists. And then, you know, came Don Kirshner's rock concert, but that was one show in per week, and it was Friday nights at midnight, and that was it.
I'm old enough to remember that.
Yeah, I am too. And it's just, it goes to the heart of what we're speaking about here, because it's a whole different kind of consciousness with regards to the artist, which is why I brought that up. You know, I want to ask you something. When you're working on a campaign, when you are taking on a client, how long is the average PR campaign these days for, let's say, a new artist, a new musical artist that you're taking on? That would include, label or would include the record as well as a tour. What kind of commitment are you looking at time-wise for yourself?
Well, I start, and most of my colleagues, we have a 3-month minimum. And as I was referencing, that we'll usually start 2 to 3 months before a record's released, and then usually stay on the project for about a month after the record's released, unless the artist is touring. If the artist is touring, then maybe we'll continue to keep going and work through the tour. But a lot of the artists that I work with don't necessarily tour. Maybe they're going to do a album release concert date, and that's it. In an ideal world, like say if Blue Note is hiring me right now, it's probably going to be a 3 or 4 month campaign. We're going to start 3 months before the record's released and stay on for a month after. So that's kind of where that is. But as I said, touring creates a whole other scenario. So any of the pop acts or whatever that I used to work with, or alternative rock acts, where they set up a record and then they're going right out on tour. Then maybe it's a 6-month
commitment. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the average. Yeah. And let me ask you, for artists and bands and others that are looking to hire someone for PR, can you speak to what specifically they should be looking for in someone?
What they should be
in a
looking
publicist.
For from a publicist?
Correct.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I tapped on is a start. Passion is the publicist, like, are they passionate about your music? Do they understand what your goals are and where you want to be? Do they listen? One of the things I talked about before was listening to the client. As I said, I think it's kind of an old school thing for somebody to come in and say, "You tell me what you think, what you would do with us." Like, no, you tell me where you want to go. I will guide and advise you accordingly in areas where I think, like, okay, that's not realistic, or that's not right, or whatever, or that's wrong. Somebody comes to you with an alternative rock record or whatever, and they're like, yeah, I really see this for jazz. No, and so I might, explain why that doesn't work or whatever, or that's not going to work in the jazz media or whatever. But for me, as I said, I really think, like, are you passionate about the artist? Is that publicist passionate about you? And I look and see, like, who else that they've worked with is important as well. But I'm almost even hesitant to make that a defining line, because there's been many times where I hadn't worked. I mean, I had a first jazz artist, and when I did, that was a jazz star. He was already well known, but it was my first in the genre, and I'll work anything that I'm passionate about. Earlier this year, I worked a financial book. Period. Like I had only worked one book in my life, and it was Rick James's autobiography. So it was music, but there was this book that for me, I thought was really, really well done, and had a lot of sage advice, and it was targeted to help young people learn to be an entrepreneur and be financially dependent. And I thought it, like, provided a great service, and there was a lot of wisdom in it, and I was in. So for me, it's like, and that was all about passion. So yeah, it's not necessarily like, okay, well, they've worked with X, Y, and Z, so therefore they're going to be great for me. But sometimes that helps. If you see people, sometimes people, because I work with Brian Culbertson, and there are artists who respect Brian and say, oh, you're Brian Culbertson's publicist, and I'd love to work with you. And hey, that's cool. But it doesn't necessarily mean somebody is passionate or devoted. I think you should also get a sense on how busy somebody is, and how much time that they can devote to you. I was explaining that my company has always been a boutique, so I handle half dozen things at a time. So if you go to a big PR firm or whatever, lots of times people will hire an independent artist, an independent publicist, because they are one of 50 or one of 100 artists at a record label, and so they want personalized attention. And then they go and they make the mistake and they say, well, I'm going to hire a big PR firm. I'm not going to name any of them right now. But they'll go and they'll let me hire this big PR firm. And they go and they're one of 100 there too. So it's like, what are you doing? And then another mistake that people make lots of times is they say, oh, well, this person handled the Rolling Stones, so therefore they're going to be able to get me on TV too.
Right.
And that's not necessarily the case, because any booker, for instance, and I know we're using TV as an example, but there's a certain amount of criteria that people need to go with, and the people who make the mistake thinking, oh, well, because they handle Janet Jackson, they can do the same for me, and it's not true, because on any of these shows or whatever, the bookers are going to. I was referencing before, they want to look at your social media numbers. Do you have 10,000 followers, or do you have 1 million followers, or 100,000? Are you the headliner, or are you the opener? Are you playing at the Whiskey, or are you playing Staples Center?
Right.
These are things that go into it. How many records have you sold? Where's your position on the Billboard album charts, top 200? Not, and the mistake that some artists come to me like, wow. Like, I've had several number ones on the jazz charts, but I'm not selling records. And why aren't I getting on TV? And it's like, well, there you go. I mean, you've sold 3,000 albums, and nobody's going to put you on national TV for that.
Right.
Yeah. Rick, just as a quick aside, when you're taking on a client, depending if they're on a label, well, typically, I guess with the level of acts you're working with, they do have a label supporting them. Do you typically coordinate also in-house with their publicist as well? I mean, typically labels will have their own in-house publicist. Do you guys coordinate together, like if they're doing stuff with the same artist that you're working, or how does that work when you're in a situation like that?
Good question, and the answer would be I used to. And the reason why that's the answer, in terms of jazz, most of these labels do not have an in-house publicist anymore. The staffs are much smaller, and also, just to correct what you were saying, a lot of my artists do release their records themselves. I was just referencing Brian Culbertson, who's had 32 number one singles at Billboard. He is an iconic artist in the genre for the last 25 years, and he releases his own records. He releases it, and that's, I think, more and more, like, there are very few labels that are out there that are standing. Trippin' Rhythm is one of them. Blue Note, who I've referenced,
Shaughnessy,
Mac Avenue. There are, Shaughnessy is out there, and Shaughnessy actually does have an in-house publicist, so that would be one. But most of the others, either they'll hire an independent or really not do anything, unfortunately. So I don't necessarily. I used to coordinate with the publicist at a label. Lots of times, and there is no blanket answer on how that works.
Right.
I've worked projects where they just, once they know that, okay, it's Rick Scott's project, they stay out of my way. They're just there to provide whatever I need. And then I've worked with others where they're a little bit more hands-on, and they want to. I keep everybody apprised of what I'm doing, so they know and they can see. I'm very transparent in how I work, and I communicate well and regularly and often. So they know and normally don't necessarily feel that they need to insert themselves, but occasionally they'll say, "Oh, by the way, I sent a pitch to the following."
Right. That's the reason why I was asking, just in case, like, you guys weren't stepping over each other's toes. Is there a certain thing where, okay, I'm going to take this and you're going to do that? Or is it just, okay, Rick's taking over, so I'm going to kind of, I guess it's a case-by-case basis. It
is a case-by-case, and how that publicist normally works. Personally, I prefer having the freedom to to be the quarterback, to just do my thing, and just get that support from that in-house publicist, meaning the information and supplies and things like that I need, and that they trust me. They trust that that I know how to do this.
Right. Let me ask you, Rick. Today in marketing music, how did streaming change the game for artists with, all the interactivity and the analytics, etc. From a PR perspective? I mean, you've touched on it earlier, and I was wondering if you could expand on your answer, because you said that, we're not selling music anymore. We're just basically providing access. And I'm wondering if streaming was a big detriment to that, or was it a help in expanding the genre, or what your sense was about the streaming world specifically in, the musical areas that you particularly work?
Well, the best way that I can answer that, speaking from a jazz perspective, if I'm working a jazz record, a physical CD has to be sent, period.
Okay. Right.
The jazz media is very reluctant to download or stream an album. There are a few that do, but I explained to an artist, and I was just having this conversation with a potential new client yesterday, explaining to them that they are going to have, because they are the label, the artist is the label in this case. So I was explaining to them how they're going to have to spend one Sunday afternoon watching NFL football while they stuff press releases and CDs into 200 envelopes to send it out to the journalists, and then go to the post office. If you're when I work with a pop project or a dance project, which I'm working right now with an EDM artist, and absolutely, it's a whole different world. You can do everything by a download or a stream.
Right.
Yeah. So and I remember one of the things that I realized, the proliferation of it a few years ago. One of my clients released an album on a Friday, and then I noticed by Tuesday the entire album was online, free. There it was. I mean, it was right up there on YouTube, YouTube/Vivo or whatever. It was right there for everybody, and I was just like, wow, like how do you do it? Like, how do you get anybody to pay for the music when all of a sudden it's just right up there for free, the whole record?
And now the whole industry is that. There's no there. It's just
well, that's just a commonplace. Your record comes out and it automatically goes up on YouTube.
Whether you're Beyonce or whether you're an up and coming jazz artist, it's all there the moment it comes out. To listen to for free. Yeah. So it's the role of music and the place that it holds have become entirely different. It's transformed in the revolution, as I say.
Well, I think it was a few years ago. If I have the story correctly, I remember Chance the Rapper just basically made all his music free. It wasn't for sale.
Yes. And he wouldn't do a record deal either.
Yeah. And he just put it out there. And because he was smart enough to realize, like I was saying before, like with the idea with Kayla is to just throw out the old broken, tired music industry paradigm and create our own. And that's what he did. He created his own game, and he's certainly winning. And I think that's brilliant. And to me, I think one of the brilliant things or the beauties of the streaming situation is the fact that the other day somebody called me and they said, "Hey, I just came across somebody, and I really think you should check her out. You should listen to her music or whatever." And it was easy. They just said, look it up on YouTube, and here's her name and here's the name of the record, whatever. And the whole thing, it was just right there. And I was able to just listen to the whole thing instantaneously, and just make a decision from there. Is that something I'm interested in or want to be involved with or whatever else? And so for me, it's super easy. And like as you were saying, like how do you get new fans for somebody? And sometimes it's as simple as that. Like if somebody reads a story or they see an article, or maybe they're at a jazz festival or a music festival, and somebody comes on that they weren't expecting, and that turns them on, and they immediately can go home, and maybe they didn't buy it, but they listened to the record, and all of a sudden that artist now has a new fan, and the next time that artist comes through and playing the local venue, they'll buy a concert ticket.
Rick, today we see so many acts who have built significant audiences for themselves that aren't necessarily famous. How are they finding their audience?
I think everybody finds their audiences in different ways. I have no one answer for that. Word of mouth, and the biggest word of mouth there is out there is, of course, social media. I think people get turned on to so much new music and so many new artists through social media. Plain and simple. And it might be it's from a friend. It might be a post from the artist. It might be a post from the Pop Matters website or whatever that they like and go to and see one of their social media posts, or Pace Magazine, their social. So I think a lot of that goes back to social media. And then the other area, and this is why I always encourage artists to perform as much as possible, because you never know who's watching. And so it's like, if you build an audience, if you build the following the old-fashioned way, meaning be a road dog, play as often as you possibly can, you can grow your audience that way.
Rick, throughout your career as a manager, as a PR executive, as a marketing executive, are there any books or films that have really resonated with you professionally speaking that you could recommend to our audience?
No.
Okay. All right.
No. I remember, it's almost 30 years ago when All You Need to Know About the Music Industry, music business came out.
Yeah, Donald Passman.
Yeah, Donald Passman's book, yeah.
It's in a 10th edition now.
Yeah, exactly.
I have it, and like a lot of people, I was like, I better read it, and I never did. I have it. It's sitting. It's on my shelf, and there was all kinds of buzz and everything about that. I think right now, I think a lot of these books are probably. Again, I didn't read that book then, but I'd be curious to know if there's how much it still holds true today.
Well, it's in its 10th edition.
He just put out the 10th edition. We're going to be speaking to him next month about the new book.
Okay.
It's 10th edition. I mean, he's
very
the
relevant.
only one that's really, like, to your point,
He's
kept it
updating,
abreast of constant updating. I mean, so it's in the 10th edition. It's really contemporary because, like we were talking about, there's nothing to sell anymore. We don't have a copy model to sell. We have an access model.
Yeah, and everything that we've been talking about today regarding branding and brand extension and all that stuff holds true. So it creates a whole new set of knowledge and legal issues and payment issues. One of the terms that you guys used earlier today, I don't remember if it was Rich or Eric, which one of you said it, but you said the 360 model.
Yeah.
And that right there is completely different. All these different partnerships where people are going in, and it's not they're just they own a piece of the artist's records. They're owning a piece of their touring and their merchandise and their other branding and
their whole
and other
career.
things.
Yeah,
exactly. So,
yeah. And it's that way, by the way, that's not a the 360 used to be a major label only. It's not only a major label staple now. That is something that every significant that the independents call it a partnership agreement, partnership deals. But the independents are doing it as well. It's not like you can go to an independent and just do a music deal. Now, I'm sure there are exceptions to that, but every independent label that we speak with, they have their partnership agreements. It's sort of standard for the industry now if they're going to be putting money in and investing in a career.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think of you take an example like Janelle Monáe, and you see her in major Hollywood films, and in the award season and everything. I mean, she's
Oscar-winning films.
Yeah, exactly.
And Academy Award nominations, and yeah.
Yeah, for sure, and so she's somebody who's transcended. There's been a lot of others. Common is quite an example. I always look at Common. Yeah, we're seeing Common on the TV commercials. Common, was making great rap records, all those years ago, and was known as a conscious rapper and had a very positive image.
Jennifer Hudson.
Yeah. And now it's like I'll watch Shy on Showtime or whatever, and he's one of the executive producers of it.
Yeah.
So it's like he's in all kinds of different areas, and so yeah, that's just what it is today for those who get to that kind of level.
Okay.
Absolutely. Rick, professionally speaking, what have your biggest mistakes taught you?
Don't ask Don Henley to do press.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great, yeah. Wow.
No, that's
okay.
that's a story that I remember in my first year of PR, 1990. So almost 30 years ago, I was working. It was a benefit concert, and the Eagles. Don was going to be performing. Crosby, Stills, and Nash and Young were going to be there, and there was a whole bunch of people. And I remember going backstage and asking Don directly about going over and talking to Rolling Stone, and boy, did I get scolded. So yeah,
really, he scolded you, or Irving?
Oh
scolded
no,
you?
yeah, he scolded me, and then eventually his manager came over and said, "Look, please talk to me. Don't talk to him directly or whatever." So yeah, so I just laugh when you ask that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. If I try to think of mistakes, I almost think of I don't know if it was. I mean, I can look at it now and say it was a mistake. There was a project that I took on many years ago. 25 years or so ago. It was a rapper who had been arrested for selling her music outside of a school, and it had explicit lyrics. And because I came from hip hop and everything, and was very much into that music, and I took that project on. I look at it now, and one of the reasons why I went to jazz was I kind of had my own spiritual moment where I discovered my spirituality, and it was when I had just started working with Earth, Wind, and Fire, and I had just signed my first contemporary jazz star. And I kind of was like, well, now it's time to look at my ethics and what it is that I want to promote and what messages that I want to send, and kind of prayed on it and meditated on it or whatever, and the answers were, in a way, it kind of came back to me as all of a sudden I started. You guys branded me as a jazz publicist, and the thing I like about that is, like, I'm not going to get nobody's going to call me at 2:00 in the morning that my artist was arrested at an airport for guns and violence. So I'm working with adults, and I don't have, like, the lyrics are clean, the messages are clean.
Right.
When I was
so that was something that you consciously made that effort after that experience and said, I'm not going to no longer deal with that kind of thing.
It wasn't after that experience. It was more so like when I, as a kind of like made a choice on my spiritual path. But
right.
then it's like I can then look back and say, I can look at that and say that was a mistake. Like, why I took that project on at the time was wrong. I mean, it's something I should not have been involved with promoting. And that's why, like, everything that I do today, and that's why I was referencing you, like, me, my own brand extension of my own PR firm, and the messages that I create, and as a vegan athlete, I mean, anything that I do has got to be about four things. There are four qualities that I look for: empower, enlighten, inspire, and uplift. And I look at everything that I work on, like, does it empower? Does it enlighten? Does it inspire? Does it uplift people? And, somebody asked, like, how does that work with, like, I had an opportunity years ago I handled Rick James's final album. The album it was the first album that was released after his death, and it was the record that he finished just before his death. And they were also hiring me to represent his autobiography that he wrote when he was in jail, which I referenced earlier in our call today. And I was just like, well, how do I justify this? I mean, Rick James is always known for, drugs and sex,
debauchery,
and women,
yeah.
and, all kinds of negative messages or whatever. And I listened to that album, and then I read the autobiography. And this was an unedited autobiography. It was something that he wrote when he was in jail. And the thing that was super apparent, first of all, musically, him in particular, I had no idea that his contemporaries were Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. That Rick James was originally a singer-songwriter, and trafficked with those guys and was part of that scene. The whole booty thing or whatever kind of came about later, and yeah, he made a living on it. But his last record, it did have a few booty songs on it, but most of it showed his true talent as a gifted singer-songwriter. And that was the last message that he wanted to leave. So I was like, okay, musically I'm cool. And then reading the autobiography and like, one of the strongest things that came clear to me was like, yeah, he was an addict, but at the end of the day, he was just searching for love, just like anybody else.
Yeah.
And so
redemption.
when I discovered that, I was like, I can represent this, because like that's his message. It's like here he was somebody who was hopelessly addicted, who tried again and again and again and again to be sober. He just couldn't. He just couldn't get there. But all in all, it was like he was trying to numb his pain. He was brokenhearted. He was lacking love. He was missing the love that he desired. And so I was like, okay, that's a message I can stand behind.
Yeah, no, that's like, you know, that's about seeing the essence of someone and the essence of what you're doing and really getting, you know, what an artist is about. That's very true. Let me ask you something. What advice would you have for someone in our audience who wants to pursue a career in publicity or in marketing?
There are publicists that have some different skills. I'm a writer. I write. There are a lot of publicists out there who can't write. They might maybe be able to write a pitch, but they're just good on the phone. Now, right. I almost call nobody. And most journalists do not want to be called. So I wonder how that works in today's PR world, like outside of like what I do. But I think, and for me, I think you got to make yourself valuable. And being a writer, the fact that I can write press releases and bios and pitch letters and things like that, I get hired for artists that I don't even represent to write press releases for them and to write liner notes for them. Yeah, I did a Kenny G box set. I've never worked with Kenny G in my life, other than writing the liner notes for his box set that Sony hired me for some years ago. So it's I mean that's pretty. That's
cool.
A
great skill set. That's an important skill set for a publicist. Yeah. Yeah,
having a skill set as a writer, being one of the things, and I don't do it anymore. But one of the things I used to do, and I used to spend hours every week at a newsstand. Hours every week at a newsstand, reading everything, all the magazines and newspapers, and then I would come home with a stack and read them cover to cover. And one of the things you absolutely do need to do is you need to stay abreast of current events and current news. So whether it's reading Billboard, and you can read it online or some of it, and read like if there's certain genres that are specific to you, read those publications, be up on that news, follow artists, follow them on social media, whatever, so you know what's going on in the industry. And I mean that's one of the a super important thing. I think you need to pay attention. You need to know what's going on. You need to also know these shows. Like I read TV listings and see who's booked on The View, who's booked on Good Morning America, who's on the Today Show, who's on Jimmy Fallon, whatever. Because I want to see like what are they booking, what kind of trends, what kind of artists. Inevitably, I'm going to get on a phone call with an artist and they're going to say, "Hey, I want to be on Ellen." And I need to be able to have a reasonable answer, either yes, that makes sense, we're going to go for that, or to be able to explain to them why you're not ready for that now. Maybe we need to get you on Good Day LA first. Maybe we need to, build your story and move your album up the charts, up the Billboard charts. Maybe your social media following needs to triple or whatever it may be. But then every once in a while, as we all know, the rules get broken, right? Like Chance the Rapper broke the rules in a lot of ways. And lots of times I'll see an artist who has significantly less social media following than one of my clients and has sold less records and less chart success or whatever. And for whatever reason, all of a sudden there they are on some great national TV show. And then my life gets miserable for a day.
Right.
Because I'm trying to explain, well, occasionally there are these exceptions somehow, some way, where a booker discovered or the host of the show or whatever else, and all of a sudden it's like, oh boy. So, yeah, you got to pay attention. You got to watch these shows. I pay attention to see who's on them. I don't necessarily watch a lot of them other than Seth Meyers. So.
No, it's interesting because, I mean, you're speaking exactly the same things that I'm always encouraging my students. And, I've been teaching courses on the music business for many, many, many years. I mean, almost 30 years now of the teaching aspect. And one of the things that I've always encouraged is the reading. And back in the day, the reading was much, much more condensed in that it was just billboard. It was just, a few trades. You had to have money to get those. It was only in print. Today, I'm sorry, there's no excuse for anyone not reading. You don't have to leave your home. You don't have to get dressed. It all comes to you. I mean, I put reading lists together of Music Business Worldwide, Billboard.biz, Left Sets, this one, the TV shows, the blogs, the things that are important that they need to be keeping abreast of, just to keep aware, because the students that I'm teaching, Rick, are paying, $16,000 for a career in the music business. They want to understand the music business. And many of them just don't get that principle that you talked about how you would go to a newsstand and read, or, that you don't have to do that anymore because you can get all that info online. But just the importance of doing that.
I would even think taking like a creative writing class to do exactly the skill set that you're speaking about, that, learning how to write a story and learning how to build that.
Communicate with
exactly.
people,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I know for me, when I was in college and I was a communications management major and I had a minor in writing, but I had one public relations class, if I remember, or maybe it wasn't even public relations, maybe it was in advertising, but maybe it was PR. But you really you learn by doing. You learn by doing, and in the writing, as a writing minor, I was writing all kinds of creative things or whatever else, and as I said earlier in the call, I pride myself in being a storyteller. So for me, it's I'm always looking for the story and a creative way to tell it, and especially somebody like me, as I said, working with a voiceless artist, right, instrumentalist. So I mean, I love Norman. I've worked with dozens and dozens and dozens of guitar players. So how am I going to make this sound creative and interesting, whatever? It's oh my God, I
would think that would be even a bigger challenge for you.
Well, yeah, in a way, but if you talk to them, if you ask them the right questions, what inspired that album? What inspired you to write that music? What inspired you to make this kind of record? And hear what they're about, hear what their message is, hear what they're trying to say. I just went through it before when talking about Rick James and that record, and learning that, okay, the final testimony that he wanted to make as an artist was he wanted to remind people, at heart, he's really just a singer-songwriter. And he's just singing about love, and the same way, with any instrumentalist or whatever, or a sax player or whatever, or a keyboard player, whatever it is, it's okay, what are they writing about? What inspires them? What inspires them to write that song? What motivates them? What is their message? What is their story? Sometimes it's somebody's unique story. I was doing a campaign for a jazz vocalist a couple years ago, and her whole message was about it was kind of like almost a woman's empowering type thing, because she had been through a lot of struggles, a bitter divorce and things like that, and as we were planning this album release, this was in August, and she was going to release a record in September. During that time, she was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I said, okay, we're going to push the record release date back until October, which is National Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And this whole message of empowerment, which your whole album is about, is now going to take the shape of we're going to tell the story of your fight here, for her life. And she was like, yep, that's it. And thankfully she survived, and she actually had a second round of it. And so it didn't just go away in the first time. But all of a sudden, there was this story, and it was right there. And so my press release, all about this beautiful record that she made, now switched, because now it was okay, she was diagnosed with breast cancer, and now we're going to talk about how she's going to fight it.
And champion a cause on top of it.
Exactly,
Yeah.
And it was her personal story. It was nobody else's. So, here it was now the story shifted, and all her lyrics of I am strong and watch me soar and be independent or whatever, all still fit, and it fit that message and that theme. It's just that she needed somebody like me to look at it and say, okay, well, let's change what you were doing, and now let's make it about this. And And there you go. And that became kind of a marketing hook. And it's, some people might say that, oh, that's kind of like, I don't want to do that. And there are some artists who really don't want to put their personal life out there. She wanted to tell her whole story. She documented the whole thing on her social media. So for her, like, me giving this suggestion was just like perfect. It just fit. So
absolutely. Rick, flipping the previous question that Rich asked you, what advice can you offer our listeners who are pursuing a career as an artist?
Two things that I've referenced multiple times, and I don't mind repeating them, Eric. Play as often as you can, and build your social media following. So, I mean, those are two things off the top of my head. The other thing that I would say when I work with artists from a management perspective, I think you should be working on your craft every day. You should be writing. You should be rehearsing. You should be working on your live show. You should be working on your marketing. You should be working on your social media. There are things to be doing every day to advance your career. And it's something that, I mean, if you want to be a music professional or be a professional musician, you need to do just that. You guys know, because you're working on a weekend like now. It's 24/7 basically.
Yeah,
and that's why
it's got to be a way of life.
Yeah, you've got to be passionate about it, because like, what is going to make you want to work nights and weekends and holidays? Because that's what the entertainment industry requires. And so it's like, if you want to be a music professional, you need to be working on your skills every day, and learning something new. Because the people who are just like, well, this always worked for me in the past, but it's like you have to constantly be reinventing yourself.
And it's constantly evolving.
It's constantly changing, because when I first started in PR, it's 30 years ago. So and we've spoken during this podcast on some of the ways that PR has changed over the last 30 years, and obviously music has changed, and the whole online thing. And I remember when it was, and MP3s. I mean, everything has changed and will always be changing. Me personally, I've reinvented myself. As I said, like at one point I was branded the teen publicist. You guys branded me the jazz publicist. Okay. I've been branded other things. Some people, my sports work is a lot in pro cycling and triathlon. And so I get labeled that. And then some people know me for my compassionate efforts, and which is, that's on the newer thing over the last few years. But and that's part of reinvention for me, is following my passions and using my skills in new creative ways.
Yeah, in my defense, regarding the jazz publicist thing, I mean, the only reason why is because the only circles that I would see you at were those, so I just assumed this is his niche. So my apologies in advance for that.
It's nothing to be apologized about.
Yeah,
when, Jeff Lorber, and
yes,
Jeff, when I don't know if it was 2002 or 2003, I worked one of Jeff's albums, and we work a lot of projects together. He plays with a lot of my artists, and we're both Philly guys, and so we have a very, very good friendship. But I remember he got me hired in 2002 or 2003 to work his album. At the time, it was actually called Philly Style, which I was like, how appropriate that you and I should be collaborating on this. And what he said to me at the time was, he said, the reason why I hired you, I was at the time I was racing my bike. I was racing on a cycling team, and we trained in Santa Monica. And every day at 8 in the morning, when our training ride was done, we finished and we met at this coffee shop in Brentwood. And every morning at 8 o'clock, Jeff would be there after his workout. Jeff saw me every day. And he said, well, the reason why I hired you is because I can keep my eye on you. And that was kind of like his little joke. Like, he could see me, he was seeing me every day. Now, I tell you that story because that's another reason or a way that social media changed the game. Because prior to social media, my music industry clients had no idea I was in sports, and my sports industry clients had no idea I was in music and entertainment. So when they see my social media and they see all the things, and really I rebranded all my social media just over a year ago, and everything, like if you look at the hashtag vegan hockey player on any format, you're going to see my posts. And, I mean, that was a whole targeted thing for me. But it's like, that message. And so now, like, all the music and entertainment industry people see, like, oh, okay, he's promoting this, and all the sports people see, oh, he's doing this, and so it all, social media became like, okay, now everybody sees in one place the various aspects of my career. So it's easy for somebody to say, oh, you're the jazz guy, because Eric, you and I just saw each other in the jazz circle. So
right.
I think I'm the jazz guy.
Yeah.
There's still some people, and I've never represented Dave Koz. Dave is a friend and reverse client to me. I've never represented him personally. I've represented a handful of artists that have been on his label, and we're good friends or whatever. But like, there's so many people who still think, oh, you're Dave's publicist. No, I've never been Dave's publicist.
Right.
But like, so you get, it's easy to get brand. Well, I see you at Dave's shows all the time. Yeah, because my artists are playing with Dave. So
makes complete sense. I wanted to ask you, Rick, how can people reach you if they're interested in working with you in your company? You can
start by going to greatscottpr.com, and although
brilliant name, by the way.
Yeah. Thank you. Although greatscottpr.com hasn't been updated in a year and a half, all the basic information is there, and there's contact info. My email is there. My phone number is there, so you can contact me that way. And my social media, of course, for Twitter, it's greatscottpr is the handle. Rick.Scott on Facebook, and Instagram is rickscott16.
I cannot thank you enough for taking the time. This has been such an interesting conversation, and the depth of knowledge that you have with regards to the full scope of marketing artists and working in so many different areas was really, really refreshing and wonderful to hear. So thank you so much for doing this for us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you for having me on, and I hope the information was helpful to your listeners and inspires them on their own career path.
Absolutely. Thank you again. A lot of great stuff in there, Eric.
Yeah.
A lot of great stuff, It's always a question, when you talk about the publicity or the marketing aspect of any artist, it's always fascinating to hear, when does an artist need that? And how, and different people answer that question differently. I mean, for example, he
didn't have a measuring stick for that.
Exactly, which I thought was really interesting. He said, when you have something to sell, meaning like, a recording, or you have a new album, or you have a project that you're trying to publicize. And, the thing that he always looked at is, why should I care?
Exactly.
Why should I care? And that, I cannot emphasize that enough, because we're in an era where it's like, this is a question that, whether you, ladies and gentlemen, realize it or not, you are asking yourself that with every single decision regarding your attention. Why should I care? Is this worth my time, my energy, my commitment? Very, very, very important.
Yeah. And I also thought, when it came to, what needs to be present before working with a client, that, obviously that they have something to sell, that they're making a record. Some of the other things that he talked about is when he's looking at an artist to take on as a possible client, do they have a website? He was saying how shocked he was that he's running into people that don't have a website set up for their project. Also the social media numbers, if those are in line, or if they even have a social media presence, which he mentioned as well too, that he was dealing with certain clients that didn't have any of those.
Third album.
Yeah.
Remember, that was really interesting. And you wonder, like, how in today's day and age did that particular act, who he didn't mention, get as far as the financing and the making of a third album with no website? I mean, they must have had some other source of either income or whatever, but it's just it goes hand in hand with what you're talking about how you raise that profile, and what things need to be necessary. And I too am always amazed at how many artists, because I always assign an artist in my classes. You have to find an artist that you are interested in signing as one of my projects for the classes, and I'm amazed at how many students over the last 4 or 5 terms, the artists that they are working with, no website. And that's the easiest thing for an artist themselves to control. Yeah. The easiest.
Yeah, exactly. Another really salient point in this interview was how to identify an artist's audience. And I thought that it was interesting that he turned it on the artist to ask the artist what they thought, listening to while they're talking in that initial exploratory interview with the potential client, and what are their goals and what do they plan to achieve. And also I thought that was interesting too, was to list some outlets. He thought that having the artist list some outlets that they felt like would be good for them to kind of start painting a full picture of what they want to do as far as in terms of publicity. And then from there, he can kind of form a more thing saying whether, yeah, you're not going to get Rolling Stone, but we might be able to get you an American songwriter, that kind of thing, you know.
And also, he talked about it gives him a sense of, have they given this any thought?
Any thought, right.
You know, do they have a realistic understanding of, you know, I'm a rock act, but yet I want to be, you know, I'm thinking
exactly.
Like be in alignment.
He gave
with
that
it.
Example, right?
Yeah, really, really important. And you know, also that, you know, he doesn't put, you know, his own ideas out there and tell people what you need to be doing. He wants to get from you what your vision is,
exactly,
and help fulfill in that. And that I thought was that's again, you know, very, very much in tune with the times that we live in today about an artist and a band or an act being accountable for their own career, even down to the creative level of who they are and what they want to project about themselves.
Yeah.
And you've talked about that, you know, with Disciples, about, you know, what's the image? What's the identity? What is the passion? What do you care about?
What's the message? Yeah.
What's the message?
Yeah, exactly.
What's being communicated here, and what do you care about?
Those are all the questions that everybody needs to be asking themselves, whether they're a solo artist or whether they're a band. What is their message, you know? And then turning that around and trying to figure out what's the avatar and start building that out, what the audience. So, you know, it's a lot of work, but they're very simple questions that if you start asking yourself those and you start looking for them, you can start identifying there. And that's how you start building a marketing plan and, you know, how you're going to attack this. You know, and then also finally, you know, when he talked about, you know, when we asked about what to look for in a PR professional when considering hiring one. And, you know, he talked about, you know, being passionate about the music. You know, you want to hire somebody that gets it and that understands it. That's just not going to phone it in as a PR person and go, oh, yeah, we'll take that on and, you know, whatever. Let me just run it through the usual, you know, my little template that I do. You want somebody that really is into what you're doing and understands the goals and that's listening to the client and that can guide the artist as well too. And I thought another great question that he asked was, who else have they worked with in the past? And is there a match there of understanding somebody that's been doing that type of music for a while? I mean, they don't have to be strictly a hard rock publicist or a jazz publicist, but somebody that if they have worked with those acts, that they do get the market and they understand what's going on.
Yeah, I think there's an important point there in that it doesn't have to be an exact match. Or you just, you know, it's not like you have to have just and certain people do get pigeonholed.
Right.
You know, where it's like you have success with one type of act, a lot of success, let's say, and every single metal band or every single jazz act. Exactly. And some people build careers on that because it becomes, that's my thing. I know that market. I know it very well. But then there's other people, you know, like Rick was saying, that want something, you know, they want a broader, diverse kind of clientele. And, you know, to your point, you know, who else have you worked with? I mean, that's an important point. But the other thing, too, is do they understand who you are as an artist? If they don't, run, you know? Go to somebody who really has an understanding of who you are as an artist. That's very, very important.
Hey Insiders, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at MUBUTV.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate and review our show over at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top-rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes in our space. You can also find us on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Insider Video Series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Rich Ezra and Eric Knight. This show would not be here if it weren't for our amazing team, which are the following: interview editors Sarah Nissenbaum and Alex Taylor, show notes and transcriptions by Jani Chang, Nicole Capodoglo, Lilia Owens, and Sarah Nissenbaum. Theme music by Disciples of Babylon. And be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast.